The silliness of Moore was then unfortunately taken a little bit too far. It very quickly became a double-edged sword. So there was, in For Your Eyes Only, there was a wonderfully silly opening with, the cold opening with Battersea's power station where Blofeld gets dropped into it, and that was really good fun. But very quickly it goes too far under Moore. They started calling women things like Holly Goodhead and Octopussy. Jaws very quickly goes from a cold-blooded and sinister killer and the spy who loved me to having a comical relationship with a skinny nerd that was sort of a parallel to Bond's own relationship in Moonraker. So it very, very quickly went too far the other way, and I think it demonstrated a lack of direction. And there was an element of confusion there, I believe, over the identity of Bond and what Bond was supposed to stand for. And the expectations of the past and their legacy must have made it very difficult to effectively make a change to the formula and sort of steer the ship in the right direction. And that's why despite the fact that they were, often wrong moves, I do applaud, the Alien sequels for at least trying to do something new. They, quite frequently it's the wrong thing to do, but at least they've got all this weight and pressure of expectation. They do try and freshen it up. And as I touched on, actually, I do think that Jaws in that first film, who knows, he may well have been an inspiration for the Terminator. He's that metal man that keeps on coming back and, he gets buried by rubble and stuff and get run over by a van. I don't know, maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but, something I thought I saw in there. I was really surprised to see a clearly aged Connery reappearing for making a second comeback for Never Say Never Again. I wasn't expecting that, actually. And to be honest, it was a little bit embarrassing to see all these, throughout the film, all the leggy lovelies, fawning over him. And, he looks like he just needs to sit down and a cup of tea, to be quite honest with you. And it wasn't an MGM film. It wasn't made of Pinewood. And you can see the difference in style, actually. It's got Max von Sydow as Blofeld, who I thought actually died in the power station, and also it's got Rowan Atkinson as a bumbling diplomatic attaché or whatever he is, and it's got Kim Basinger as a Bond girl, which was very surprising to see. But actually, watching the film, there was also a baddie lady with dark hair, and I preferred the baddie one over Kim Basinger. And she was really, really horrible. I don't really want to dig too deeply into the psychology of that, but there we go. The music is, again, a bit more funky. Felix is a black guy, to mix it up a bit. Bond, also I noticed, actually, Bond sleeps with a woman at a health retreat, but promises to, ensure that she doesn't get caught because she might lose her job. Whereas, I don't know whether this is intentional or not, but this is an exact mirror to one of the Connery Bonds, in which he goes to a health spa, Connery's Bond. He then tries it on with one of the employees. She knocks him back. So then he blackmails her with losing her job to have sex with him, and then she goes, yeah, all right then. So that was about 15 years before. So it was, it really represented a change to me of Bond, although arguably you could say this wasn't an official one. So, there was at least a change there. And Never Say Never Again was actually pretty good. It seems to lack the production values or just maybe the attention to detail of some of the other Bonds. Also, unlike most of Connery's outings, there's lots of miscellaneous baddies who get killed throughout. So at the beginning, there's a big scene where he shoots a load of people dead. Whereas, the early Bonds, the first one was Dr. No. To my memory, only actually Dr. No gets killed in that film as the only baddie that the Bond kills. Never Say Never Again, Miss Moneypenny is actually played by a different actress, which played my autism to play up. I've actually invented this massive backstory about Miss Moneypenny, the original one, and she needs the money to pay to, fix the orphanage roof or something like this. And, there's this non-union scab turning up as Miss Moneypenny and just, being in a film. I thought that was shocking. Never Say Never Again actually came out exactly the same year as Octopussy, which was, the glory days of 1983. And on the whole, I probably prefer Never Say Never. It's got a better plot and probably better acting, really. But to be fair, Octopussy features the death scene of 009 dressed as a clown, so it gets pretty big points for that. But Old Man Time was not kind on Connery or Moore by 1983, and it was interesting to see them both doing a film and both looking, pretty old. I mean, Connery looked like an old man. Moore looked more like a sort of zombie, really, to be perfectly honest, and it was quite sad to see them like that. I thought Timothy Dalton, I mean, he came next as the Bond. I thought he was perfectly decent. I don't know, really. I get the sense that he wasn't tremendously popular. He certainly wasn't in that many a film, but maybe people thought he was a little bit too ordinary or plain. But I think one of the mistakes that they'd made with the Bond films in general is there's so much focus on the character of Bond themselves. I don't think they give an opportunity for other things to develop. So whether that be other characters, the plot, the script, whatever, there's too much focus on Bond as a character. And I think in the grand scheme of things, Bond himself isn't that important. He is, he is effectively a Lothario killer. And, in Dalton's first film, again, we got a bit of a change, and it seems to have been easiest for them to initiate some sort of change in the Bond formula, because by this point it had become so much of a, sort of cookie-cutter Bond film that I think the only real way that they could change stuff was to get a new Bond in, and then there was a little bit more leeway to try and, move the supertank around a little bit. So, Q Branch developed silly things like a synth pop playing ghetto blaster that fires a rocket or something. We saw a new Miss Moneypenny, and we got the murder of a perfectly efficient milkman, as far as we can tell. But what I do like about Timothy Dalton, actually, is he's got this sort of Cheshire Cat smile that, would really fit a psychopath pretty well. But I suppose when I think about it, you're talking about the progression of the Bonds. So if we look at from Moore to Dalton and then to Brosnan, I think it's a lesson in how to play it safe, really. So all three Bonds are pretty much cut from the same cloth. They're all smooth, handsome, and they're quibbing. But I think they lack that really nasty side that Connery had and Daniel Craig had, and George Lazenby was sort of laying to the side because he was all over the place. We're not really sure what he meant to do, and I think it's really essential to have that nasty side in Bond, because fundamentally the point of somebody like Bond is they are essentially a murderer with a badge, and I think we need at least some sort of hint of a little bit of nastiness. And with Roger Moore, you don't get that. You'd be perfectly happy, with him taking your grandma out for a dance or something like that. You think he'd be a perfectly nice gentleman. And I think even if Bond doesn't look death square in the eye, at least we've got to have some sort of sideways glance at it. We've got to, look into the abyss, at least, from an angle. We don't have to stare directly into it, but we need to know that there is actually an abyss out there. Interesting, actually, The Living Daylights was really similar to GoldenEye in terms of plot and structure. And I was thinking about Bond's view of Bond. It's the people that make Bond, their self-perception. And actually, I think Bond is sort of a response to Britain's wounded pride, really. So you see, recession, the end of the Second World War, Britain is no longer a superpower. There were in real life, there were sort of embarrassing Cold War missteps, and they were directly responsible for Bond's inception. Bond was pro-British propaganda. And throughout, the Bond series, I think it's been very, very careful to position itself in the way at which it wants the world to perceive Britain, or for Britain to be perceived. And I think it's probably most overt in Skyfall, but it's been prevalent throughout the whole series. I was actually very damning of Quantum of Solace for being baggy, unnecessarily confusing, and a bit all over the place. But it's actually a characteristic of probably the majority of Bond films through the 50-odd years of its existence. And, I remember thinking as a kid that Bond was absolutely action-packed. But while they've certainly turned up the action, as the films have gone, they've ratcheted the action up. But it's surprising how baggy and plodding they can be. And it's probably, that's probably been the thing that was hardest to get through, watching so many Bonds in such a short space of time.